Our guest today has been a leader in Chicago's public, private, legal sectors for decades. She's known the Obamas since before they were married. She is now CEO and a board member of the Barack Obama Foundation. She was senior advisor to President Obama from 2009 to 17. That is every single day that he was in the White House. Fun story. She told me that she got to the White House before the parade was over, and she waved goodbye when they got in the car with the Trumps to go to his inauguration. So she was in the White House longer than President Obama was. Stanford undergrad, law degree from the University of Michigan Law, author of the New York Times bestselling book, Finding My Voice. Valerie Jarrett, welcome home. Thank you so much for joining Axios.
Thank you,
What
Mike.
a treat.
Hello, everyone. You're supposed to say hello back. Welcome to Chicago, best city on earth.
That was a great President Obama thing when the crowd would say, "We love you," he'd always say,
I love you back.
So we have a great Chicago audience here in person. And Valerie, you have a date in Chicago every Sunday night.
I do, with my mom, who's 95, almost 96. We've been having Sunday dinner for as long as I can remember. I'm an only child, but I got a huge extended family. And so particularly on a day like today, a beautiful summer in Chicago, nothing like my mom's backyard. I know, it's pretty nice.
So you came to Chicago at age 5. You worked for Mayor Richard Daley. You've seen Chicago grow. You've been part of its growth. Put this moment in perspective for Chicago. This convention, this moment, the incredible candidacy that is launching here. What does this week mean for Chicago?
Well, it's a great opportunity for us to showcase a magnificent city. It looks spectacular. It is an engine. Having worked for a mayor, I do believe that our cities are the economic engine of our country. They're the vitality of our country. They represent the rich diversity of our country. And this is my third convention in my lifetime in Chicago, 68, 96, and now. And I think we're getting better each time. Yeah, thank you, yeah.
So when David got to talk with David Plouffe earlier, and he was talking about how there is here at the Democratic Convention in Chicago, as people get ready for the nomination of Vice President Harris, he and others have said that there is 2008 energy. We were talking backstage. My nephew, Tate Erickson, is here. We were kibitzing, and I said, when people talk about 2008 energy, do you get jealous? And you said,
no. I mean, a big part, I think, of President Obama's legacy is that he believed in the hopefulness of our country, that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. He believed in freedom. He believed in everything that you're hearing from Vice President Harris. And so, in a sense, it's a continuation of the hard work he began, except, you think about it, Axios didn't exist back then. Social media wasn't the way it is. And so we had a lot of energy on the ground back in 2007, 2008. And that is what's happening now. But it's also happening on all these different platforms, and I think it's magnificent. So we have nothing but joy and enthusiasm for what's going on right now. Young people today who are picking up that baton and running with it is all President Obama would have ever wanted.
and that's a big part of the Barack Obama Foundation mission.
What a nice segue. Thank you. Into my day job. So yes, so our mission is to inspire, empower, and connect people to change their worlds. And we would invite anyone who wants to take a short trip, 15 minutes down Lakeshore Drive. You can see coming out of the ground the museum, but it's going to be a whole campus. It's 19.3 acres in the middle of Jackson Park, right on the lakefront, next to the Museum of Science and Industry and the University of Chicago. We'll have a forum building with an auditorium, music studios, a Chicago Public Library, so our young people in the community will feel welcome to come in and read, an athletic center, walking trails, vegetable and fruit garden like Michelle Obama had in the White House, and just a great amenity. And so we have a museum campus downtown, and now we're going to have one on the south side.
Story time.
Oh, story time.
It's
Yes.
1991. A Miss Robinson comes to you for advice. Do tell.
So in 1991, I had just been appointed Deputy Chief of Staff to Mayor Daley. And I was staffing up the office, and someone sent me a resume, and across the top, it said, Michelle Robinson is a brilliant young lawyer, has no interest in being at a big law firm, and would like to explore public service. Well, I had been at a big law firm and had no interest in that, sorry to anybody here who's at a big law firm, and wanted to give back to the city I loved. And so I called her up, I said, please come in for an interview. She blew me away. I still remember how she walked in, shook my hand, looked confident, and she's like 26, 27 years old at the time. And instead of telling me about Princeton undergrad or Harvard Law School, she told me her story, which is the quintessential American story, which I don't have to repeat because you all know it. And the thing, though, I will repeat that she said that day that I'll never forget was that I said, why public service? I was motivated because I'd had a daughter, and I was always so proud of my mom who worked, and I thought if I stay in this law firm, my daughter will never be that proud of me. I need to find some purpose and passion. And I said, look, I left because I was a mom and I wanted my daughter to be proud. Why are you considering leaving? She said her best friend and her dad had died in the prior year. And it was such a wake-up call. And she said, I need to find purpose and do something with my skills where I'm giving back. And I said, well, do it right here. And I offered her a job on the spot. I had no authority to offer her a job, but I thought, who could turn her down? And I talked to her a few days later, and I said, well, and she said, I got bad news. And I said, what? She said, my fiance doesn't think it's such a great idea. I said, well, who's your fiance, and why do we care what he thinks? And she laughed just the way you are, and she said, well, he started his career as a community organizer, and Mayor Daley isn't necessarily the person he would think he would want me working for, and so he wants to know who's going to be looking out for me. And I told him, you, and would you have dinner with us? And in retrospect, quite wisely, I said yes. And that was 33 years ago this summer, 1991.
And you've been
I know,
on
wow. Decades.
No, it's amazing. So you have been part of the Obama's personal and professional life as they started where you were talking about here to when they became some of the most famous people in the world. Tell us about that journey.
Well, so I did go to that dinner, and at the end of the dinner, I said, Mike, two things. One, I thought that they would be married forever. Why? You just could feel the love and respect. And people have often said, well, why did she need her fiance to approve what she was going to do? But having been there for every professional decision he's ever made, he never made a single one without her there. So it was really more of a reflection on their partnership. The second thing I thought at the end of dinner, because I asked him, well, what do you want to do with your life too? And he expressed an interest in public service. And I just thought, you're so just committed and smart, and you love Chicago, and you two are such an amazing couple. I bet one day you could be mayor of Chicago. So needless to say, as he reminds me quite often, he exceeded my expectations. And I pinched myself. We flew in yesterday, and I said to them, this is going to be so much fun to be back in our hometown. And here you guys are, two like the most popular people in the world. And they're like, it's hard to believe, right? I said, yeah, it is really hard to believe. But I think part of why it has been so magical is that, and Michelle Obama said this in the 2012 convention speech. She said, people often say to her, has being president changed her husband? And she said, no, you are who you are, but it has revealed who he is. And what I would say over the last 30 years, I've been so amazed to see revealed what kind of human beings they are, and their core is absolutely the same as it was the day we had dinner.
I feel like they enjoy their lives. You were talking about that moment when they said, hard to believe, President Obama, I definitely could say he loves being Barack Obama.
He's very happy. Someone once told him that there is no better job than former president of the United States of America. And I will say, people say, well, do you miss it? And I say that the two of them are so forward-looking, and they're still relatively young. And what gives them pleasure is seeing the next generation of leaders mature. And part of the mission of the foundation is to help people, regardless of party affiliation or even subject matter interest, give them the tools that they need to go forth and change society and our world. And we have programs in the United States and Asia and Africa and in Europe. We help boys and young men of color. We help adolescent girls stay in school. We have a scholarship, thanks to Airbnb, for seniors and juniors and seniors in college to go and travel during their summers. And all of this is to just empower that next generation. And so coming full circle, seeing someone like Vice President Harris, who President Obama has now known 20 years, back when she was, a DA in San Francisco, and to see what's happened to her career and to be able to help her in any way he can, wow, that's just as good as it gets.
So just as you took a chance on Michelle Robinson, somebody who took a chance on me, Gail Shea was the Shenandoah bureau chief of the Richmond Times-Dispatch when I was a college student and helped me learn journalism. She's watching right now from Plum Lake, Wisconsin. And she has been a long, long time admirer of her. I said, what should I ask Valerie Jarrett? Here was her question.
Be nice, Gail.
You were at the right hand of the president for 8 years in every possible situation. What does it take to do the job? How do you know Vice President Harris is ready?
Well, it takes a lot. It's a hard job, let me tell you, if you do it right. So first of all, you have to do it for the right reason. It's not about you. It's about service. You have to be able to absorb pain, because no matter what decisions you make, somebody's going to be unhappy. And so you have to have a sense of true north. And what's your true north? You have to listen. I think leaders who don't listen are not really effective leaders, because you're leading people who are voting for you, and you have to understand what are their hopes and their dreams. You have to be curious, both intellectually curious and emotionally curious. You've got to be willing to say, I made a mistake. You got to be willing to change your mind. And you have to have courage. It is not for the faint at heart, and particularly in our current environment. And you have to surround yourself with people who will tell you what you don't want to hear. And I think part of my job when I worked for President Obama, because I had already known him so long, I was only motivated by just trying to give him my best advice, informed advice. Do your homework, pick a team around you that shares your values, but will push you and help you think outside the box and check you when they don't think you're right, but ultimately will support you in the decisions that you make. And I think that Vice President Harris has all of those same qualities. And there is probably no better training ground to be president than being vice president for 4 years, and being vice president to a president who, as President Biden said last night, the best decision he ever made professionally was selecting her. And so to have that kind of a relationship where you're in the room and the last voice, and do that for 4 years, not to mention the track record of her career before that, I can't imagine really how she could be any more prepared to be president of the United States than she is. You agree? I hope you agree. You better clap enthusiastically.
You get the crowd going.
I was going to say, we got to not only agree, but we got to work hard.
So we were chatting backstage with our mutual friend, Michael Feldman, and he was making the point that Vice President Harris has enjoyed an enviable month of ball control, an incredible month where she was, as the cover of the New Yorker, which you saw on Axios AM, showed the roller coaster going up for Vice President Harris and Governor Walz. But Valerie, you've been there. You know that doesn't last. President Obama's great expression, he'd always talk about, it's going to be our time in the barrel.
Well, so our time in the barrel began, if you will remember, when President Obama won the Iowa caucuses. Those of you who are old enough to remember that. We thought, oh my goodness, and we are going for gold. And we go into New Hampshire, and we are way ahead of the polls. And I remember one of the advisors, President Obama, said, campaigns are a roller coaster. We're up now, but we'll be down. And we're like, we're just going to roll the deck. And of course, New Hampshire was a devastating defeat. But out of that, people found out who he was. And yes, we came out of that terrible experience. And it forced us to have to go to many more states and introduce him to many more people, and in the end, it was actually good for us. And so there will be a whole multitude of tests. She is absolutely on a roll right now, and I think it's a pent-up enthusiasm. I think people are they're tired of all the negativity, the polarization, the toxicity. I think when Governor Walz said, she's full of joy, people want joy. They actually want to like each other. They want to know their neighbor. They want to feel a responsibility. And I think that they're seeing that in the two of them. And so, yes, I'm sure that there will be, it's a short campaign. It's a lot shorter, certainly, than ours was. But there will inevitably be things that go wrong. And I think that's an opportunity because you see what people are made of, not when things are going well, but when times get tough. And I have every confidence in the two of them and all of the people who will surround him that will help keep pushing them forward.
Earlier, you mentioned leadership. We have a lot of leaders in this room and watching. We have a lot of rising future leaders, including Tate back there. What is something that you've learned over your years as a leader, community, corporate, political, legal, philanthropic? What's a leadership lesson that you pass on to young people?
Just never lose sight of why you're doing what you're doing. And for me, the reminder is being around the people whose decisions, the decisions you make, whose lives are going to be affected by those decisions, and staying in touch and realizing that ordinary people do extraordinary things. And so maybe, Mike, I'll share with you, I was in San Francisco doing my book tour, and after the book tour, I always say, particularly to the young people in the room, every one of you can make a difference. And it can be in your own community. And I always recommend people start local because you know the community and they know you. And I said, so do something in your lives to be a part, to be a citizen, to be an active and engaged citizen. And a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, I want to tell you what I do. And I said, what do you do? And she was like an older woman in San Francisco, looked a little like you would imagine an older woman in San Francisco might look. And she said, I comb through the newspaper and I look for naturalization ceremonies within a bus ride of my home. And then I get my ironing board, and I get on the bus, and I go to the naturalization ceremony, and I'm like, where are we going with this story? Where's security? And she said, I put my ironing board out in front, and when people come out of the naturalization ceremonies, I register them to vote. And so I say, if she can do that on her own time, with her own ironing board, then everybody can do something. And just think of, and this is like 7 years ago, imagine how many people she has registered to vote since then. That's what one person can do. And I think leaders have to keep that in mind. And so anybody can make a difference. You don't have to be the President of the United States to do something good.
Question about President Obama's leadership or management style. I'm hoping to get a very practical tip from you. I'm going to prime the pump, and you can correct me. As I recall, one of President Obama's hallmarks was if there was a meeting, a group of people, if somebody hadn't spoken, he would call on them. You can correct that, modify that, but what is something that would benefit our guests today that you learned watching President Obama in action?
So if you are a leader, there is immediately a power discrepancy. The people who work for you came to work for you because they think you're pretty smart. And when you're the President of the United States and leader of the free world, everyone thinks you're pretty smart. And they think you probably know all the answers, and you don't. And so one of the things that he would do to level that playing field, and you know, Mike, from the White House, say the Roosevelt Room, it's very hierarchical. The cabinets sit around the table with the senior staff, and the people who really did the hard work are on the back bench, we call them, backbenchers. And he would be engaged in conversation, let's say, and you have to read your audience. This is something else that, it's not just enough to be an expert and read your documents, all of which he did every night. You have to be emotionally intelligent and be able to look around the room and see, you can tell by somebody's expression if they have something to say. And the people in the back are just like this, and they know the answer. And he would look around the cabinet member and he would go, well, what do you think? And if you were to say, well, I'd actually disagree, then you'd get the full Obama, and he would lean in and he'd go, well, tell me why. And he would lower his voice and he would do all these things to make you feel comfortable pushing back. And he also never said what he thought at the beginning of the meeting, because then everybody's going to fall in line. And you would try to listen. It's like the Supreme Court oral arguments. You would try to figure out, well, what does he think by the questions? And sometimes he was just asking those questions to be contrarian and to see where you would go with it. And so I do think that those of us are in positions where people look up to you. If you want to get the best out of your team, you have to make them feel comfortable telling you what they really think, particularly when they disagree, especially when they disagree with you.
You just used a very memorable phrase. What is the full Obama?
The full Obama is when you just know you have his undivided attention, and he's curious and he's interested in hearing you. And I'll give you a story to exemplify this. We were debating whether or not to bail out the automobile industry. And I won't give you all the details, but enough to know. And all of the senior economic team and senior advisors are in the Oval Office. And President Obama is pushing us and pushing us and pushing us. And we all agreed on what he should do. And he said, does everyone agree? And we said, yes. And he said, do your teams agree? Exactly. And one of the senior members of his staff said, well, actually, one of the members of the Council on Economic Advisors doesn't agree. And so he said, well, why is he not in the room? We waited for 10 minutes for that staff person to run from the old executive office building to the Oval. He walks in, imagine that look on his face. All the bosses are there. And President Obama says, I hear you don't agree. But he said it really nicely. He said, tell me why. I really want to hear what you have to say. Well, by the time he collected himself and was no longer hyperventilating from the run across the street, he made a very cogent argument for why he was right. Now, ultimately, the president agreed with us. But imagine how empowering it was for that person to know that the president didn't want to make a decision until he had heard from him. That's leadership.
An incredible night tonight in the night of our country and of Chicago. The former First Lady, the former president are coming back to their hometown to address the Democratic National Convention. We'll start with the First Lady. What will her message be?
Well, look, I think that having been married to the president, she knows very well what it takes. She knows Vice President Harris very well. So I think it will be a personal message, and I think it will be one of why this is an opportunity for us to be joyful and get engaged again and be enthusiastic again and work hard again, knowing that there will be, as you said, Mike, those roller coasters ahead. And I think the president will talk again in personal terms about what it takes to be president in this moment, and what he's prepared to do, and that this is an all-hands-on-deck moment where we all have to get involved. I think one of the lessons we certainly should have learned, it's not just enough to elect a president. You also have to stay engaged throughout the term of their presidency. And sometimes you elect a president, you go, okay, I'm done, and you go back to your job. And that's not the way democracies work. And our democracy has been under threat and under attack. And it is up to us to be those active and engaged citizens to ensure that we get back on track. And I think that's part of the message you'll hear from both of them tonight. So be there or be square. Tune in if you're not there in person.
Or be at Axios house and avoid
the... Or be at Axios house, but tune in. Don't miss it.
So you mentioned earlier that you caught a pretty nice ride, a pretty comfy ride here into Chicago. Back in 2007 when we met, and it was in 2007 that you first met Vice President Harris. And I know that back then you were very fancy, so tell us where you met Vice President Harris.
I think I met her when she was in our office, like getting ready to make phone calls or knock on doors, and she had on gym shoes and I had on gym shoes. And she was, I mean, what struck me about her is she's already an elected official, a DA for a big city, and she was prepared to roll up her sleeves and do what everybody else was doing. And I think that was what was so remarkable about President Obama's campaign, and what I've sensed already from Vice President Harris's campaign is that you'll have right next to each other these senior seasoned elected officials and volunteers. And I think, as President Biden said last night, I'm going to be your best volunteer. And so that's the energy and enthusiasm that I saw back in 2007 when I first met her, that I saw when I worked with her most closely when she was Attorney General in California. She was tenacious. She really was. When we were trying to do a settlement with the banks, she was like the last Attorney General, and she said, I think we can do more for our citizens who've been affected by these horrendous mortgages. I think we can do better by them. And she held out. And I think that's the kind of fight and tenacity that we want from our president.
And a lesson for our young guests today, she was willing to work when it wasn't fancy.
When it was not at all fancy, let me tell you, and I love Iowa, but it was not fancy. Because politics at the local level in Iowa is you are in people's living rooms, and they invite you in their living room. You are a guest in their home. And you don't have to be all highfalutin, because they want to know you. President Obama used to say, they want to kick your tires and lift up your hood and find out what you're made of. And you can't do that if you're standing up here. You've got to sit around that kitchen table and convince them that they should literally put their lives in your hands. And that takes trust.
That is a very vivid analogy with the car. I'm about to get the hook here. So, penultimate question. There's been a lot of talk this week about passing the torch, but something you talk about, something the Obama Foundation talks a lot about, is passing the torch to a younger generation of leaders. How does that literally happen, and how can we help?
Well, we got to identify who those young leaders are. And I love the fact that our foundation selects these young leaders from around the world, and I get to spend time with them and hear their stories and what motivates them and invest in them. And you can do it on a macro level, but it's really rewarding if you just spend some time with somebody and say, how can I help you? And I will say leadership can be very lonely. And don't just assume because somebody has a highfalutin title that they're not lonely. And so figure out ways in which you can help those young leaders. And in this world today, they're dealing with everything from wars to climate change to this toxic environment to bullying on social media. I mean, there's a lot going on. They survived COVID. And so some of them are more fragile because of their life experiences. And so take a minute and find one that you think is a superstar, like I did 30 years ago, and stick with them, because it is extraordinarily gratifying when you see their potential reached. Thank you guys so much.
And we always, one fun thing. So one of the best memories that I have of the privilege of covering President Obama was when he picked a very nice place to summer, which was Martha's Vineyard, which was a little more comfy than Crawford, Texas, which is where his predecessor had
exactly
summered. But your favorite restaurant in the world, some of us may think that Nancy is a cartoon, but Nancy's is a restaurant. Tell us about Nancy's.
They're nodding their heads.
And how often you eat there.
Well, all right. So we just came in from Martha's Vineyard yesterday. Going back, I go to Nancy's every day. Now, the person who owns the home I live in owns Nancy, so I have a little good relationship with him. The best fried shrimp in the world. It's on the harbor in Oak Bluffs. If you ever get to Martha's Vineyard and you don't stop at Nancy's, you are going to miss a real treat. I see these smiling faces. They know what I'm talking about. It's not fancy, picnic tables, and I'm there at least twice a day. And I probably gained 5 pounds in the last month since I got there.
Thank you, Axios Chicago. Thank you, Chicago. Up next is the great Naila Boodoo. Valerie Jarrett, thanks for an amazing conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.